how it got out from a subpoena document into the public arena, I would have no idea.
It seemed that Broken Rights had access to it, if not had a copy of it.
That would seem to be the case. How they got it from a subpoena document, I don't know.
Thank you. Now, if we can turn over to paragraph 16. Now you'll see in the previous paragraph, it's clear that Monsignor Usher was participating in the meeting as well. You see that?
Yes.
Now, in paragraph 16, Monsignor Peters is recorded as saying he was surprised by the admissions and that it was not clear if he was telling the truth, and that Monsignor Usher agreed with that, and it was not clear if it was fantasy or made up, and it was unreal and weird. Now, was that...
I object to that characterisation. My friend has rolled the first two sentences of that paragraph together, and then he suggested that Monsignor Usher agreed with this. It's certainly not clear that he agreed with the first two sentences. In fact, the ordinary reading would be that he agreed with the second sentence only, and it should be put in my submission on that basis.
Well, I'm not sure. But I'll let counsel put the questions as she chooses. Other witness can respond. Please, Commissioner.
Now you see paragraph 16, don't you?
Yes.
And you see what Monsignor Peters is referred to or recorded as saying. Firstly, that he was surprised by the admissions.
Yes.
You see that? And then he said it was not clear if he was telling the truth.
Yes.
And then it's recorded that Monsignor Usher agreed with this.
Yes.
And then he said it was not clear if it was fantasy or made up.
Yes.
And it was unreal or weird.
Yes.
Now, was that your recollection of the meeting, that firstly it was not clear if Farrell was telling the truth?
Well, that was certainly my impression right through.
And what was it about what he said in his demeanour that caused you to form the view that it wasn't clear if he was telling the truth?
Well, he was very defensive about everything, is my recollection. And there was reference to the boys in Woolree that he said were...
Oh, this is cutting out. He's obviously saying something that no one wants him to. The Commission doesn't want to get out for some reason. How long this gag will go for, I'm not quite sure.
Is said to have agreed with this. Was it your position that it wasn't clear whether Monsignor Peters was telling the truth?
I have no recollection.
Whether Farrell was telling the truth?
I have no recollection of him saying the words that are in that letter.
No. This is a report of the meeting. I'll say it again. Monsignor Peters says that it was not clear if he was telling the truth. That is, if Farrell was telling the truth. Was that your position?
No, my position is that I have no recollection of those words about which he says he's not sure if they were the truth or what had been said.
There may be a misunderstanding, Father. What appears in this record is a record of Monsignor Peters on the 4th of July saying that it was not clear if he was telling the truth.
Yes.
And your answer was My position is that I have no recollection of those words about which he says he's not sure if they were telling the truth or not being said. So what words are you saying that Monsignor Peters is referring to when he says it's not clear if he's not telling the truth?
Well, as I understand this paragraph, there are the alleged admissions in the letter, including very, very explicit language in Wayne Peters' letter. As I read this, Wayne Peters is saying that he believes that when Farrell said that he was surprised. And then he goes on to say that having heard him say that, he's not sure if what he was saying was the truth.
And so you're saying you didn't hear any admissions, right?
I didn't hear those words. I said
Which words?
The words in the letter.
I see.
The description of appalling behaviour. They would have been seared in my memory, those explicit words, and I did not hear them.
We discussed that yesterday. Farrell was telling the truth. We now know that, don't we?
Well, I don't know that, Your Honour. I don't know what Farrell said. I can only say, Your Honour, on my oath, what my memory is. Now, if he says he said it, there's a number of other aspects of that conversation and that letter that make no sense to me.
No, but Farrell was telling the truth, wasn't he?
I don't know whether he was telling the truth or not.
He's able to draw conclusions, but others, including a federal court judge, have drawn different conclusions. There are other possibilities, and it's, with respect, difficult for my client to agree or not. It's not a
Well,
really.
We don't want to go too far into it, but I hear what you say, and I've heard what's said. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Well, as you would understand, Father, there was a very recent court case and sentencing. You understand that?
Yes.
In relation to Farrell, and the sentencing remarks indicate a significant degree of detail
Yes.
as to what Farrell either admitted to or was convicted of.
I wouldn't dispute that he did what he said in that letter.
Thank you.
All I'm saying is...
That was the question I was
I'm
asking.
sorry, Your Honour, I misunderstood. I did not hear him say that at that meeting. And the idea that he would begin with admissions, and then we would go on with all of the other discussion that's in Wayne Peters' letter, is something that's quite contrary to what I would have expected the practice of that meeting to be. If he came in with, after a few minutes, with those explicit admissions as he's described in that letter, virtually that would have been the end of the meeting.
Father Lucas, is it your position that Father Monsignor Peters just made it all up?
I don't have any explanation, as I said yesterday, Your Honour. I cannot make sense of that letter in the context of the way that meeting and those sorts of meetings are conducted. Now, my first intuition was that he got information from somewhere else. I can't explain it.
Well, do you accept that we have to test what you say was the true position against the record made at the time?
I understand that.
Yeah.
As I said, Your Honour, yesterday, if it was to be a case of the letter and my memory, I would concede that my memory was obviously faulty. But the letter in the context of the meeting and the fact that we had two more meetings, why would we need two more meetings when we got exactly what we wanted in the first 15 minutes of this meeting? That makes no sense to me.
Because you were trying to get him out of the church, but that's a different issue.
Well, if we'd have said what he said and I remembered him saying that, we'd have got him out of the church. That would have been the end of it.
Well, I have to tell you, Father Lucas, that we will have to consider, Justice Code and I, the contemporaneous record against what you say is a complete absence of a discussion of that matter. Do you understand?
I understand that, Your Honour. I can only, on my oath, tell you what I remember.
Well, you understand what I'm saying to you then?
I certainly do, and I fully appreciate that point.
Now, Father, you understood that Bishop Manning had removed this man's faculties before the meeting.
Yes.
You understood that it was his unequivocal view that Farrell would not come back into a ministry.
Well,
You understood that?
No, he was wanting that to be tested, as I understood that was the purpose of the meeting.
So you didn't have an understanding that before September 1992, Bishop Manning wasn't of the firm view that this man would never come back.
I think he certainly, that was his hope, but I think he wanted that tested. And that was the purpose of the meeting, to test that and to give him some further security.
Now, you would have read this document, I take it, Father?
Yes.
Now, it's dated a couple of days before your interview with Farrell.
Yes.
And it appears from the first paragraph to be an opportunity to discuss with Farrell the letter which I've already taken you to, that Bishop Manning provided to him about your meeting. And he sets out John's, as he describes it, response. In relation to 3 other incidents.
Yes.
And Bishop Manning made the decision not to question him about these. Do you see that?
Yes.
So we don't know whether or not Farrell would have said more about those incidents because he wasn't given the opportunity, according to this note, was
Yes.
it? So it is.
Or alternatively, that Bishop Manning didn't believe him.
Well, what is said is, I didn't question him about these.
Yes.
Do you see that? So he made a decision, according to his own note, not to question him.
Yes.
Therefore, it cannot be known whether or not Farrell would have said more.
Yes.
And it certainly can't be concluded that he would not have said more.
True.
Now, he then, in paragraph 6, refers to 2 alliances with women, which he claimed proved his complete heterosexuality.
Yes.
Now that, while not being a criminal offence, clearly was in clerical terms against his vows.
Yes.
And therefore misconduct in a church sense.
Yes.
And then the next paragraph is expressing fear at the possibility of laicization, and then in quotations, those protecting the church would charge him, and stopping there, it seems what he's saying is that if he was laicized, he's more likely to be charged than if he wasn't. Is that how you read that?
Yes.
Because he thought in some way that the cloak of being part of the clergy would prevent Catholics who may be the parents or the young men he had abused of charging him and therefore bringing the church into some scandal.
Yes, I would have thought the exact opposite. That while they see him still functioning as a priest, they'd be much more likely and willing to make further complaints. And I think that's what I put to him in the meeting.
And we don't know one way or the other. This is his surmise, and you've just given us your surmise. And again, you've got Bishop Manning saying, I've refrained from pursuing this, but I wondered afterwards if he had grounds for the fear. Now, the next stop point, we can scroll up, related the one verbal reference to the incident at Maryland's for which Bishop Heather had sacked him. Now, there's a phrase in parenthesis above it saying claims it was the only grounds on which his appointment was withdrawn. Now, it can be taken from that, can't it, that he has admitted effectively in that conversation to what happened at Parramatta in terms of the language used with the altar servers?
Yes.
And he had indeed on a previous occasion, in relation to an earlier note, admitted that conduct.
Yes.
So, by 2 days before the meeting with you, Farrell had shown a preparedness to admit to a range of what was clearly criminal conduct in relation to the 14 years of peace. That's right.
On the assumption that that's what was understood to him to be telling the truth. I don't know whether that was him winding the bishop up or what the circumstances were. But
well, it's against his interest to say that, wasn't it?
Well, that was the point, why he would do that and then persist in his denials.
He did do it in relation to this meeting in accordance with this note, didn't he?
Well, that's if the note is an accurate understanding of what happened between the
Have you
two.
got any reason to believe that Bishop Manning would do anything other than honestly and accurately
I'm sure he accurately and honestly recorded it, but I'm not sure what he meant by I didn't question him any further. That's what is a puzzlement to me, why he didn't call off the meeting with us, having got exactly what he wanted from us. I don't understand that.
Well,
there'd be no reason for us to have to meet with him any further if Bishop Manning had from him, as his bishop, those explicit admissions. That I can't understand or explain that.
Well, you have the case where he's withdrawn his faculties, haven't you? That's the only thing that was available to the bishop to do himself.
Well, no, he could have immediately begun a laicization process.
Initiating a process in terms of taking action that had immediate effect on whether this person was a priest, it was withdrawing his faculty, wasn't it?
It's one step further than that. He suspends him. He puts out a decree of suspension.
Well, effectively, this man was told he couldn't act as a priest.
Correct.
So what he did was what he could do immediately to remove him from being associated with being a priest in the public eye.
Yes.
That's right. And the next step, as you say, was laicization, and to begin what is known to be a lengthy process. That's right.
Well, there's yes.
And
we've had evidence many times that it was, at this stage anyway, virtually impossible, absent the consent of the priest.
That's correct, depending on the circumstances. We understand that.
So the reality facing the bishop was if he was to be removed from the church, he had to be persuaded to agree.
No, the bishop could put a decree of suspension on him.
No, but to remove, to the lay state,
yes,
he effectively had to consent to it.
It would have been very difficult to have had a canonical trial.
And it's the case, isn't it, that it was your area that the bishops were looking to assist in moving a priest into the process of acceptance and therefore out the church.
I would have thought if the bishop had...
No. Let me put the question and I'd like you to answer it, Father. It's the case, isn't it, that the work you did was to assist the bishop in moving a priest out and towards the path of laicization?
That was sometimes the purpose. There were other purposes, but sometimes that was the purpose, but he wouldn't have needed that action if the bishop already had the information that he was wanting us to gather.
Well, isn't it the case that in order to move to the step of having him agree to either move towards laicization or in some way leave the church, he needed to be persuaded as to that?
And that would have been the brief. That's what puzzles me, that Bishop Manning didn't say, I've got admissions out of him, I want you to persuade him to be laicized. That's what puzzles me.
Father Lucas, I'm puzzled. You've told us previously and you tell us now that your role was to talk to priests and get them removed from the church by agreeing to go.
Yes.
Well, isn't that the reason the bishop called you in?
That the bishop would brief you on the information that he had so you'd know where the beginning was. And instead of having 3 meetings, we'd have had a very brief meeting because the bishop's already got the admission, apparently, and he rings up and says, look, he's already admitted to me that he's done this, this and this, but I want you to explain the laicization. It would have been a very different meeting, and that's the same puzzlement I have with respect to Wayne Peters' letter. It would have been a very different meeting in the light of that information.
But your purpose in the meeting was to get Farrell to agree to being laicized.
Did you do that on the basis of some information that you have?
Perhaps, but until the man says yes, you haven't fulfilled the task given to you by the bishop, have you?
Well, he he'll say yes very easily in the light of the brief the bishop's given. That's my puzzlement.
Well, he may or may not. He plainly, having regard to the bishop's note, accepted that he'd done wrong, but was very concerned about being lay-sized.
I understand that, but when a person makes the admission such as is alleged, you end up in the whole area of contrition and remorse and the drama of that, none of which happened in this case.
Well, yes, all right.
Well, you say that he'll end up in the whole area of contrition and remorse and the drama of that, and I think that's a phrase you've used previously. That's right.
Yes.
In relation to Farrell, had you been in a position of receiving an admission from him in the past? And so your reference to your expectation was based on your experience with other priests?
Yes.
Not with Father Farrell?
Yes.
Now, and we'll come to the detail of these letters, but it's clear that he was reluctant to accept what was put to him in terms of a plan to get out.
Yes.
And the subsequent meetings were in order to persuade him that that was the best course of action for him.
Yes.
And in order to persuade him as to that, whether or not he'd made admissions to you, that process was still necessary, wasn't it?
The process, if he'd have made those admissions, what I'm calling the 5-year plan would have been ridiculous. We had the admission of very, very serious conduct that would have grounded the suspension by the bishop.
And when you say the suspension by the bishop, what would be the effect of a suspension?
That he'd be completely removed from every public ministry.
Well, wasn't that the effect anyway? He was removed from public ministry.
Yes.
So in effect, the bishop had gone as far as he could. He needed you, because that's what you did, to move him further towards the laicization path, which he did by a plan.
Yes.
Now, just put into one side this document. And coming back to the meeting that you didn't participate in on the 4th of July.
So which?
Sorry, this is 285 that we had before. And perhaps if we can turn to the last page. The top paragraph of 23, Monsignor Peters is reported as saying that Father Farrell referred to the boys by reference to the number of boys rather than names. You see that?
Yes.
And so what he is recorded as saying, that no specifics were given so as not to incriminate himself, that's by reference to the admissions that were made as recorded in Monsignor Peters' letter, with that account that the names weren't given the boys.
Yes.
And he also says no names were provided so no one could contact any victims. Was that part of what you thought was an outcome of the meeting? Contacting victims?
Well, that could have been, and one of my regrets is that we should have been much more proactive to follow up on that.
Now, paragraph 27. There's reference there to in consultation with you, who gave him a form of words. Monsignor Peters responded that Father Farrell had nothing specific in a legal sense that could be reported to the police. Now, that's a reference to words similar to the ones that you initially used?
Yes.
And did you tell him those words in order for him to use them?
Well, that was the conversation we had about that email.
And that is the conversation that ended up being reported as no admissions.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm confused. I
I'm
missed
sorry,
the question.
let me go back. There were a number of conversations the three of you had on the 31st of May, and as a result of that, you understood there was a common agreement as to the form of words.
Yes.
And then Father Usher went forward with what he considered to be the common agreement, which was no admissions.
Yes.
And what you have subsequently said is that Father Usher must have misunderstood you.
Yes.
Because your words were no specific admissions or something similar to
That's
that.
right.
And then now what Monsignor Peters is saying is that you gave him those words as well.
Yes.
And so we're in a position where the two of you were of the view that that was said, and yet Father Usher was off to the Cardinal with a different form of words on the basis that the three of you agreed.
Yes.
And then in paragraph 28, Monsignor Peters is recorded as saying he stands by the letter.
Yes.
You see that? Now, if we can turn to tab 286. Now, this is, I think, the same day of the previous meeting was held.
Yes.
And now you're present.
Well, this was on the phone in the back of a car on the way to the airport.
So it's the same participants except you're there and Father Peters isn't there.
Yes.
And you understood the purpose was the same, and this time to discuss your recollection?
Because my expectation was that I would have been part of the one conversation, but they rang me separately.
Does it surprise you, Father, that in order to understand the recollection of three people at a meeting in circumstances where to date it seemed that there was a different recollection, that to have all of these people present, including two of the participants at the same time, was not designed to obtain merely the honest account or recollection of one of those who was there?
It could well be.
When you say that could well be,
I'm not sure what was in the mind of all those other people.
in terms of what was in your mind at this meeting, did you think this was an appropriate way to go about understanding what each of you thought had occurred at the meeting?
I wouldn't have done it that way at all.
When you say you wouldn't have done it that way, how would you have done it that is different from the way in which it was done?
Well, each person gives their recollection.
Separately?
Yes.
But that's not what you did at the beginning. You
No, it's true.
put all your heads together as soon as you got the email.
And if we're now in a situation where there obviously is conflict about all of that, that needs to be revisited.
Well, there was conflict from the first meeting by the sounds of it.
Which first meeting?
The first meeting or discussion between the three of you where you said nothing specific. Seems like Monsignor Peters thought that and Father Usher thought no firm admission.
Well, he agreed with the statement, so the first statement was sent to both of them to agree with, and both agreed with it.
Prior to that, I think he'd written the note to the Cardinal, hadn't
He did, but I had no knowledge of that note.
he? So would you accept now that from the beginning the process was one that certainly didn't result in an honest recollection being gained and provided publicly?
I don't think I'd agree with that. I think there was every attempt to be honest.
Albeit honest in a way that each of you ultimately shared the same view.
Well, to try to come to it, trying to recall a meeting 20 years before.
But trying to come to common ground is not necessarily consistent with each coming with an honest view, is it?
Well, it's testing each other's recollection.
But is it testing each other's recollection if in fact the goal is a common view? Isn't it more manipulating each recollection in order that each of you were prepared to say something that the others were prepared to say? It's just an exercise of manipulation, isn't it?
I wouldn't agree with that.
Some would say it's an exercise in spin. What do you say to that?
I don't agree with that.
So coming back to this meeting, as you say, you're on the telephone, and there's a record below of what you said. Having read this recently, I take it that you have a view whether or not this is accurate as to what you said.
Well, it's hard for me to remember. I'm in the back seat of a car on the way to the airport. Some of it rings a bell with me, some of it I don't recall.
You don't doubt that it's honestly recorded?
I don't know.
Now, paragraph 3, firstly you say no one has said no admissions were made. quite true. Father Usher said no admissions were made.
Well, I think the no one was me, as I said. I had never said that no admissions were made.
Okay, so that should be read as you had not said no admissions were made. And you asked those present to carefully review the text of your email to Four Corners, which said no admissions of a specific nature were made. See that?
Yes.
And a careful review was necessary because you had been very careful, I take it, in the words you used.
Yes.
And then when asked what type of admissions were made, you said he was vague and all over the place, he was ranting.
That's my recollection of the tone of the meeting, yes.
Well, you were asked specifically about what type of admissions were made, and that's recorded as your answer to that question. You see that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
When asked what type of admissions were made, he, that's you, added he was vague and all over the place and was ranting.
Well, I don't recall that question being put to me, but I do recall saying something along the lines that he was vague and all over the place.
Because to this Royal Commission, you have answered that question of what admissions were made if they weren't specific, and you provided one admission
Yes.
In relation to a surmise that you made
Yes.
that something had happened with
Yes.
a boy.
Yes.
That's right. Now, you say here he was vague and all over the place, he was ranting. That's something that you came to the view of at the very beginning of having received the communication from Four Corners. Isn't that right?
So that was my recollection of the meeting.
And your recollection hadn't changed in the subsequent week or so, 6 weeks or so, 5 weeks or so. Is that right?
So, no. No, this is a track change, so I'm not quite sure what precisely I said.
Well, that's why I asked you, Father, whether you accepted this as an account of what you said.
Well, whether I said he was all over the place or whether I said he was vague and all over the place, I don't specifically remember now, but it looks like someone's made a track change.
Is that a track change or just an emphasis?
On the side, Your Honour, there's a line down which
Oh, I see what you mean.
Did you see this document after it was created?
Never.
So you've only seen this for the purpose of
Yes.
for this. Having read it, is there anything else you can tell us that you think either you didn't say or you don't recollect saying?
I certainly would have said I took no notes of the meeting. It was true I had no recollection of discussing any question referring to the police. He confirmed he had no input on Monsignor's letter. I'd never seen the letter. The letter doesn't accord with the meeting. And I have no recollection of Farrell saying what was in the letter.
When you say that we tried to, or when you quoted as saying we tried to get him talking to see whether he would say something that would enable us to suspend him, in fact, as you've said, what the bishop had done was effectively suspending him.
It's to take that, what might have been a temporary suspension by the bishop, to a permanent level. Which is what puzzles me, because if the bishop had had that explicit admission, he wouldn't have needed to have us do anything about that.
Well, he did have the explicit discussion if his file note is accepted, and he did want you to do something about it. You understand that?
Well, I don't recall by the 3rd of September that conversation of the 1st of September.
Even if he didn't mention it to your father, if one accepts that file note as accurate, he knew of it and still wanted you to go ahead and meet with Farrell with a view to getting rid of him.
Yes.
So your puzzlement is one thing, but in fact, if one accepts that file note, he had that information and he still wanted you to go ahead, didn't he?
Yes.
Now, you then refer to Farrell as being evasive and all over the place, and you wondered whether it was truthful. What was truthful?
What was allegedly said, but I don't recall that.
Well, what did he say that there was a doubt as to whether he was being truthful or not?
I don't recall at that point directing my mind to whether what was in the letter had been said by Farrell but not being truthful. My recollection was that I heard him say what was in that letter.
Now, just turning over the page, paragraph 8. you're reported as saying there that you've never spoken to any victim of Farrell. That's not right, is it?
I said that because I'd obviously had the conversation with the young lady.
It's in quotes, but that's not something you said.
I don't believe I would have.
And then paragraph 9, you went on to say that you had talked to Monsignor Peters about the letter and the need for him to include that he had embellished it. Now, stopping there, that reads as though you were going to tell Peters what to do in terms of saying something inconsistent with the letter he'd written 20 years ago.
I wouldn't have said that. I had in my mind I wanted to talk to Peters to ask him for an explanation. At that stage, one of my hypotheses was, had he embellished it, it would have been for Peters to explain that or give some other explanation. I certainly wouldn't have had in my mind that I would be telling him to do anything other than what was in his mind the truth of the matter.
That what you said is entirely inconsistent with that. No, to accept that.
I do, absolutely.
So you didn't consider that you were, among the three of you, the person primarily responsible for finding common ground?
Not any longer.
Why not any longer?
Well, Wayne Peters had obviously misled us. He'd had this letter. He'd never disclosed the letter to us. He'd agreed with the form of words. He'd never cavilled with that to say, well, that's not right, I've got this letter with what I said. He never said that. That's, again, part of my puzzle.
Well, hasn't he said that he forgot?
That might have been what he said, but I can't understand how you could forget.
20 years?
I mean, he'd, from what we now know, had directed his mind to the letter on other occasions during that 20 years.
So you don't accept that he forgot and he only recalled it when either Four Corners or Broken Rights was brought to his attention. You don't accept that?
That might have been the case, but it doesn't seem so plausible. I don't know.
So your memory was sufficient that after 20 years you could remember that no specific admissions were made, and you can remember the admission you say was made.
Yes.
That's right. And his memory was not as good as yours, and he was unable to remember that a letter had been written. And you don't accept that?
Well, it was his letter. He wrote it. That's my puzzle.
When you say puzzlement, is it the case that you don't accept that he could not have remembered it?
Well, I'm not doubting his honesty, but I'm saying to me that's a puzzlement that he could have written such a letter and never brought it to our attention. And I have some recollection from what we understand subsequently that he in fact had gone to Armidale to retrieve the file.
I'm not sure what you're saying about Monsignor Peters.
I'm saying I'm puzzled that he claims not to have remembered such a letter.
And you don't accept his claim?
Well,
Is he or not?
That's not something that I can really comment on, other than to say it doesn't accord with what I would have thought would have been the situation.
The letter into the public domain mechanism that none of you would have expected.
Certainly.
In fact, I think it turned up in some documents associated with litigation.
Yes.
If that hadn't have happened, the public may never have known about the existence of the letter, might they?
That would be the case, yes.
You told us yesterday that Peters rang you in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Very concerned that the ABC got the letter.
Yes.
I take it his concern was that the letter contradicted the statements that you'd all agreed should be made to the press.
Precisely.
I take it he was concerned that the letter in fact revealed the true position that your statements hadn't.
Well, I don't know whether that's the conclusion or not.
Sounds like it would be the conclusion, doesn't it?
Well, as I said, Your Honour, if it was only the letter and my memory, I'd conclude that my memory was obviously faulty, but I can't explain that letter in the context of all of the other information or all of the circumstances. It makes no sense to me at all that Farrell, a few minutes into a meeting, would have made explicit admissions such as are described. Number one, that I wouldn't have remembered it, and and that we would have conducted the meeting the way we did, because all of the rest of the material in that Peter's letter is generally the material that you use to lead into someone making a disclosure. It doesn't come after the disclosure, it's what you need to do to get to the disclosure. That makes no sense to me.
Well, this meeting didn't go like some others, but Senior Peters wrote a letter recording what happened, didn't he?
Well, he did, and I can't explain that letter.
And what you were seeking to do, was recorded in paragraph 9, was to get Peters to say publicly something that would minimise the intent of that letter in order for you all to get off the hook and not be thought of to cover up what happened in 92.
I don't accept that was the import of what I was saying. It may have been the conclusion of the person who drafted the note. My expectation was to be able to talk to Peters at some point in time, find out what his explanation was. My theory was, had he embellished it or had he got information from somewhere else? I was looking for an opportunity to talk to him. I thought I would have had the opportunity when they asked me to be available for a meeting with him, and they didn't give me that opportunity, so I said I would talk to him at some other time. But I had nothing in my mind about him then making some false statement. I wouldn't have asked him to do that.
So you wanted the opportunity to persuade him that what he'd said in the letter was wrong, in the sense that it wasn't
I wouldn't agree.
embellished?
With respect, I wouldn't agree with the word of an opportunity to persuade him of anything. I wanted to talk to him to see what his explanation was.
Well, the whole point of getting your heads together was, as you said, to come to a common ground, which meant some of you needed to be persuaded to a position which was common from a position they held which may not have been common. It makes sense, doesn't it?
No,
it doesn't make sense to you? And it's not consistent with what you said earlier yesterday in relation to the purpose of putting your heads together after you received the email from Four Corners.
The ground had changed quite significantly from the first opportunity when we're trying to test our recollections to see just what did happen at that meeting, to a situation where there's now quite a dramatically different version of that.
So as at the 4th of July, you clearly wanted to clear up what was in the public domain?
Yes.
And you wanted there to be one version in the public domain?
Well, not necessarily, depending on what the outcome was. Maybe we had to, depending on what came out of this, indicate that there were conflicting views.
And you wanted to get Peters off the hook in the sense of have him withdraw or in some way walk away from part of his letter?
That was never my intention.
Because if he walked away from the letter, then it could be massaged that you and Father Usher didn't have a completely different and indeed opposite view.
That was my intention, was to find out from him what the explanation of the letter was.
Now, by this stage, you had provided Father Peters with the form of words that he wanted in order to respond to what he then thought or knew he had written in the letter.
Yes.
That's right. And what you say here in relation to, this is back in paragraph 3, about being vague and all over the place and ranting, it's quite inconsistent, isn't it, with the words that you ultimately gave Peters earlier?
Yes, I didn't direct my mind to that from what he spoke to me about.
Now, can I, just before I leave that file note, were you on good terms with others in the meeting, leaving aside Father Usher?
Look, some I knew, but I'd never ever spoken to the solicitor from Cause Chambers Westgarth. I'd had very fleeting dealings with Jennifer Cook. I knew Katrina Lee in different circumstances on and off over many years. John Usher and I were very close friends. Michael Casey I worked with for 9 months when I was with Cardinal Pell. I was on terms with him. Danny Casey and I were on good terms personally, but we had quite different opinions about various things professionally.
From your knowledge of each of those persons, I take it that your expectation was that what they recorded was faithfully recorded in order to resolve the position that the church had found itself in, whereby there were differing views publicly about a meeting in 1992 which was being described as a cover-up.
Well, I can't comment on that. I don't know what was in their minds. And I think what was in their minds, obviously, was to somehow resolve the fact that public statements had been made by Cardinal Pell, for whom each of them worked, and that needed to be resolved. That was my understanding.
I didn't ask you what was in their minds. I asked you, from your knowledge of each of those persons, that it was your expectation that they recorded faithfully what was said.
I'm not sure how precise that was.
But what was your expectation? Was your expectation going into this meeting that they'd do the right thing or not?
Well, one would have assumed and hoped for that.
Now, can I turn your attention to tab 289? Now, this appears to be a draft of a media release by you, am I right?
Yes.
And this was a media release that you were issuing, you proposed to issue in your own name?
Yes.
After the meeting with those we just discussed?
Yes.
Why did you want to issue your own media release?
Because the Archdiocese had been issuing media releases in which I'd had no input. I didn't necessarily agree with the tenor of it, but I was coming back overseas expecting when I arrived back that there would be media inquiries. So I formulated a draft which I sent to John Usher and Wayne Peters of what I was intending to say. I was told by one or other of the people on the telephone that anything I said had to be vetted by them, which surprised me. So I then sent a slightly modified version of this to them, and then a slightly modified version was the one I finally released late that day.
Where were you at odds with the Archdiocese?
I'd have to look at the precise wording of
No.
press
You
release.
said that because the Archdiocese had been issuing media releases in which you had no input and you didn't necessarily agree with the tenor of it.
Well, I didn't know at that stage. I was on an aeroplane when they were releasing their...
But you say you
Press
didn't agree
releases.
with the tenor of it. What was it you disagreed with?
No, I didn't say that clearly.
What had you said?
No, I'm sorry, I may have been less precise than I tried to be.
Or what did you
My
disagree with?
understanding was I was on an aeroplane for 14 hours. I knew they were going to issue a press release in which I had no input. When I came back, I needed to see whether I needed to say something myself, particularly in the event that what had been put out was not something that was necessarily, or the tenor of it was not something I necessarily would have said in my own words.
So what was it you disagreed with?
I'd have to now look at that press release.
I'm sorry?
I'd have to look down what that press release was.
We'll find that press release for you. It's tab 283. I took you to this yesterday and you agreed with me that there are various inaccuracies in it.
Sorry, yes.
Other than what we talked about yesterday, is there any other?
No, I think the thing that jumped out at me when I eventually saw it when I got back were the notes of the meeting held. I didn't know what that was. And twice that day I sent emails asking for a copy of what they were talking about.
It doesn't go to the tenor of the statement, it just goes to one fact that you weren't aware of. Is that all?
Well, I think the things we spoke about yesterday, those inaccuracies, but this was not something I had any input into.
Coming back to your draft media release of 289, now, perhaps if you can help us with the paragraph beginning in light of the first response. Not sure what you meant by that.
That was a separate email from Mary Ann Jolly where she said, were there any admissions that needed to be referred to the police? And the no referred to that second qualifying part, the things that needed to be referred to the police. What I meant by that was, in my understanding, we'd had some form of acknowledgement or whatever about the unsafe dismissal. Since the police already knew about that. That was not something that needed to be reported to the police.
Perhaps we'll find, I'll come back to that, we'll find those emails to make sense of that. Now, just continuing on, you then refer to the best recollection of the meeting, and that the person's acknowledgement of wrongdoing was vague and generalised, and he was cautious in not incriminating himself by naming any victims. Now, I think that's the first time you've referred to his acknowledgement of wrongdoing.
Well, as I said, whether it was precisely his words or my summation, I certainly had a view that he had acknowledged wrongdoing with respect to the man who had prosecuted him.
I think the admission you've referred to was that you surmised from something he'd said that he'd done something. Is that an acknowledgement of wrongdoing?
Well, he didn't. Yeah, of course it was wrongdoing. What I surmised he did. There was some other activity with that young man, different to what he was charged with.
So
in my mind, amounted to wrongdoing. That was my memory.
So he acknowledged to you wrongdoing?
Well, I can't be precise as to whether it was his words or I surmising from his words, but that was my conclusion.
So acknowledgement probably isn't the best word to use. And then he was cautious in not incriminating himself. So you recall some 20 years earlier, not just that he didn't incriminate himself, but in fact he was cautious in doing it, therefore he had some mindset about what he was doing.
That was my recollection, that he, in referring to these other people, he was of a view that they were all making up lies about him, that he wasn't going to make any specific agreement that what was being alleged was something he had done. And there was certainly no names mentioned, other than, of course, the name that we knew from the court case.
Well, if he was vague and generalised, what would be the circumstances in which he'd make mention of any names?
That's precisely the point I was making.
Well, you say that he was cautious in not incriminating himself by naming any victims, and it suggests that he named events that occurred but just didn't put names to them.
No, that's not how I read or intended that.
That's entirely consistent with Monsignor Peter's letter. He didn't name any victims.
That's true.
Now, you refer to common ground there, that Monsignor Peter's letter, that no names were mentioned.
Yes.
And then you say on that basis you didn't report anything because there was no named victim to report.
Yes.
Is that right? So that was the basis on not reporting to the police.
No, this is my public response to the Wayne Peters letter, which is now in the public forum.
So what was your private response?
This was what I was proposing to...
Understand that, but what was your private response to why you didn't report to the police? What was your private view?
I didn't think we had anything to report to the police.
Because of what?
It was already known to the police.
So your... that what he said was vague and ungeneralised. Refer to common ground there, that Monsignor Peter's letter, that no names were mentioned.
Yes.
And then you say on that basis you didn't report anything because there was no named victim to report.
Yes.
Right? So that was the basis on not reporting to the police.
This is my public response to the Wayne Peters letter, which is now in the public forum.
So what was your private response?
This was what I was proposing to...
Understand that, but what was your private response to why you didn't report to the police? What was your private view?
I didn't think we had anything to report to the police.
Because of what?
It was already known to the police.
So your private view about not reporting to the police was not related to what was said or not said in the meeting. It was just that the police had known him from 1988.
The police had known him from 1988. There was nothing specific said at that meeting.
1988.
Sorry, 1988. There was nothing specific said at that meeting that I could recall that would have grounded a reporting to the police.
So there were two matters. One, the police knew him, and two, he didn't say anything specific that would have grounded a report.
Yes.
And is that second matter related to there were no names of the victims?
I don't think it's just that there were no names, but as I said, my position has always been I don't recall him giving that description of the conduct.
Now, coming down to the very point of the meeting, which is a few paragraphs down, you say that the very point of the meeting Bishop Manning asked us to have was to persuade him to resign from the ministry and petition the Vatican for laicization.
Yes.
That's right, isn't it? It wasn't about necessarily evaluating. The very point was to get rid of him.
Yes.
Now, just coming down to the last paragraph, your final sentence is the current combative approach is not helpful. It's in response to the previous sentence about victims' advocates.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I would have always said this from the very beginning of Towards Healing, wanted to work with the various victims advocate groups for the well-being of people who've been abused, and the combative approach I didn't ever find it.
So at that stage there was probably quite a bit of criticism in the media about you and others in the church by victims groups about what Four Corners described as a cover-up. So
there was constant criticism of everything we did all the time by victims groups.
And particularly in relation to the recent events.
Yes.
Now, just turning to the next tab, which is 90. This is, I think, a further draft.
I'm not sure if that's the final version.
I think there's another version as well. Now, this is the version that you did, having received comments from others. Is that how we're doing?
Yes, this would be the middle version, yes.
The middle version.
Yes.
Now, what is different from this version from the previous version is that you've removed reference to vague and generalised. I'll just get the right words for you. You said in the first version that his acknowledgement of wrongdoing was vague and generalised, and for some reason you removed vague and generalised. Is that because your knowledge or recollection of the state was stronger and it was no longer that what he said was vague and ungeneralised?
I can't explain the reason for that editing change.
I beg your pardon?
So I can't explain the reason for that editing change now.
Now, the second last paragraph, you refer to Monsignor Peter's letter, which notes that you did your best to explain there was no possibility of future ministry. That's the first letter or subsequent letter?
Look, I'm not sure now.
But to the extent the letter said that, you obviously accepted that it was wrong.
Yes.
Now, you removed the reference to being combative. Someone with a clearer head recommended that.
I probably. I think probably I was advised that would only make it more combative and be provocative.
You also, I think, referred to sworn evidence before the Wood Royal Commission, which you removed from this draft as well. Not useful to you to refer to that?
Oh, probably in interest of space and whatever, but I'd stand by that evidence to the Wood Royal Commission.
Now, if we then go to 291, you're clearly seeking comments from Father Usher and Father Peters, and then in the next document 292 you're seeking views from a number of those that were present at that meeting of the 4th of July.
Yes.
And seeking again those notes.
Yes.
Then over at 293 you sought legal advice about the media release. Down the bottom of the page.
Yes.
Why were you seeking legal advice about a media release?
Just to make sure that what I was saying was appropriate.
Appropriate in a legal sense?
Yes.
What were you concerned about?
I don't know whether I was concerned about anything, but for abundant caution, I sought some additional advice. Perhaps not legal advice in the strict sense, further advice as to what I was saying.
And you see from further up in the email that at least a couple of people from whom you sought advice seem to have at least raised eyebrows about the media release.
Well, I wasn't seeking legal advice from those people.
No, I'm just saying that they seem to, from this email, have raised eyebrows about your media release.
Yes.
Now, can we then go to 294, which is your final media release?
Yes.
Now, this is different again from the previous media releases in terms of your presumably then recollection of what happened 20 years ago. That's right.
Well, I think it's substantially the same. I by what I said, the four corners at the beginning.
Well, you removed in this one that he was cautious in not incriminating himself. Is that something you no longer believe to be the case?
I can't explain that in any change.
I beg your pardon?
I said I can't explain that in any change. I don't know what was in my mind or what advice I was given.
There's no doubt that over the course of these three media releases, what you put down on paper as to what your recollection was changed.
Not so much my recollection, but the way things were described. My recollection was as per the response to four corners. That was the substance of my recollection.
Well, then when you're saying...
Further explanation of what that meant in the light of the Wayne Peters letter.
Well, being cautious and not incriminating himself is quite an extension of no specific admissions, isn't it?
Well, I can be wrapped up in the words, we did not have any details of victims. He didn't give us those. He was cautious not to give us those.
So what you were seeking to do in the ultimate email, and presumably the drafts leading up to it, was provide a version to the media that permitted you to stand aside from Peter's letter, Monsignor Peter's letter.
I'm sure I don't understand that.
What you were seeking to do in this media release was to provide a version to the media that permitted you to separate yourself from Monsignor Peter's letter.
Yes.
And also from Monsignor Usher.
I stand by my original position that there had been specific admissions. He had stayed firm, having thought that he misunderstood what I said about that, to his position. No admissions.
Now, on the 6th of July, there was a summary prepared of the events thus far, and that appears behind tab 97. Now, I take it you've read that?
Just in the course of these proceedings, yes.
Have you seen it before?
No,
I beg your pardon?
not that I'm aware of, no.
You can't help us the purpose of the background briefing paper?
No.
Now, is there anything in this document that you disagree with?
How do you know? Oh, yeah.
paragraph 2 doesn't apply with my memory. I'm not quite sure I understand paragraph 5.
Perhaps if you can just turn to paragraph 9. She's referring there to your advice to media outlets, which we'll come to, but towards the end of that paragraph, there's reference to you indicating that no names have been mentioned. You didn't feel you had a duty to report. Without the names, there couldn't be a successful prosecution. Now, stopping there, that's one of the reasons you gave earlier for not reporting.
Yes.
And then the final sentence is in relation to a comment that the responsibility for reporting to police rests with the victim.
Yes.
Was that another reason you had for not reporting to the police?
If people turn on the issues of those victims were.
Now, then the next tab is the media release. That's just a limited release to the Australian. I take it you weren't asked your advice before that went out?
No.
And then if we can turn to the next tab, which is a media release from Bishop Kennedy, the Bishop of Armidale. And I take it you weren't consulted on this?
No.
See, there's reference in paragraph 2 to Monsignor Peters wrote an honest account of his recollections of the meeting.
Yes.
You accept that, don't you?
So you wrote an honest account. I'm
Yes.
not sure. I can't explain that.
Well, you don't accept that he was honest in what he believed was said.
Well, I can't explain why he said what he said.
Well, leaving aside that you can't explain it, you accept that when he wrote that letter, he was doing his honest best to record what he heard.
Well, I don't know whether he was mistaken. I can't explain that now.
Even if he was mistaken, you can still be honest, can't you?
Well, I can't get into his mind as to his honesty. I have no reason to doubt his intentions, but I can't explain that.
Now, perhaps if we can turn to tab 303, this was an interview that you had with AM,
Yes.
Tony Easley.
Yes.
Now, I take it that it was your decision to be interviewed.
Yes.
What did you think you'd achieved by the interview?
Well, there was a lot of media pressure on me. I had many requests. And I thought best to do one interview only, and I did that with AM. I put out the press release and then did the one interview with AM.
Now, having read this recently, you know that there are a number of occasions during this interview where you provided a different recollection from the range of recollections you provided over the previous weeks. You understand that?
Well, this is a free-flowing interview and things would have been said differently.
Yes, but given the publicity and the fact that words were so important in relation to the public mind about this, surely you were careful to make sure that the words you used were very precise.
Well, I did my very best.
So, bottom of page 1, the bottom of page 1, you're quoted there as saying, there was a very generalised discussion. He was certainly very, very cautious not to incriminate himself and very, very careful to know his matters. So that seems to be a movement from where you were last in relation to your memory. Is that right?
Well, I think I've said that in my first draft press release, the first draft that was made.
And then you removed it from the subsequent drafts.
Yes.
And presumably you removed it because you were uncertain about whether or not he was cautious about incriminating himself.
Well, or someone told me to take it out, but no time.
Well, how could someone tell you to take out something that was your recollection about a movement?
It's what you put in. You're writing a press release. You're not writing a transcript of everything. It's how much you say and how you say it.
So it wasn't considered to be in your interest to put that in the press release, presumably?
Well, I wouldn't have disputed it when I said it on air. I was happy to say it on air.
Now, onto the second page, about a third of the page down. You say that this is criminal and wicked behaviour. So that was your description of Father Farrell?
In general terms, yes. I think the way Tony Eastley put it was a sort of a flippant comment, so he admitted he was a bad boy. We're not talking about someone who's a bad boy, we're talking about someone about whom there are allegations in the court case of very wicked and criminal behaviour.
Well, you say that this is criminal and wicked behaviour, but to take the matter further with the police, of course, you need to have some names, etc. That's clearly a reference to the meeting with him, isn't it?
Yes.
And so by now you're of the view that his behaviour was criminal and wicked.
I've always been like you.
You've not expressed it before, had you?
Well, not in those terms, but that was in response to an apparent put down. So he admitted he'd been a naughty boy. Well, that's just a ridiculous suggestion, so he responded accordingly.
You responded by using the word you've used there.
Yes.
Now, we can come over to the next page.
Well, just before you do, you say there that further on the page that there was no point in taking information that is information about criminal and wicked behaviour. I want to know why not. If someone comes to you and confesses to you that they've engaged in wicked and criminal behaviour, the police have taken an investigation which, in relation to a particular allegation, failed to pass the committal process. Yeah. Why wouldn't it be of use to the police to know that to you he had admitted that he'd engaged in wicked and criminal behaviour, even without knowing?
Well, I think to say to the police, this man has told me that he's done some wicked criminal thing, the first thing the police will say, well, what?
Well,
where and to whom and when? None of which I could have answered.
no, but they could have then made their own inquiries, couldn't they? Knowing that they had a foundation for them.
Well, they'd already presumably made their inquiries.
Well, how do you know?
That was not something, Your Honour, that I directed my mind to in those circumstances.
Well, your explanation that there was no utility in going to the police, it doesn't have any substance, does it?
Well, with due respect, I think you can't go to the police with something as vague as that.
Well, it's put to you in summary form at the end of the next page. If we can have that on the screen. Tony Eastley says, so just for the record, an admission by Father F, albeit vague, was made at that meeting you attended. Father F said he'd committed serious crimes but didn't go into specifics, yet you and the other two priests present didn't think it was worthy of referring to the police. So that was his summary.
Yes.
And then your response to it was dealing with the protocols that have been in place since 1992. So I take it that you accepted that summary?
No, I don't think I accepted it. I went on with an explanation.
As to how you do things differently now?
Yes.
But it is the case that he said he committed serious crimes, isn't it?
Sorry?
It is the case that Father F, as is described, he said he'd committed serious crimes.
Well, I don't think he said it as explicitly as that. I said we were dealing with the insecurity of the dismissal of the committal proceedings. That was what was primarily in my mind.
Now, there was a second meeting, wasn't there? On the 24th of September?
Yes.
And you were present at that meeting?
Yes.
And you provided an account to the bishop after that meeting, didn't you?
Yes.
And that's behind tab 167. Now, you've read this recently, I take it?
Yes.
And it was dated the 25th of September, which is the day after the meeting.
Yes.
And you refer to the attached document,
Yes.
and that's on the other page.
Yes.
And perhaps if we can just have that. You wrote this, I take it.
Certainly.
For the reasons previously explained and taking into account all the circumstances, there's no possibility of an appointment. Do you see that? So it's clear that by the second meeting, at least, there was a decision made that he wasn't going to get an appointment, and you had to work out a way of getting him out.
Well, it's just possibly an appointment at this stage.
So you were stringing him along, as it were, so as to ensure that the ultimate outcome was achieved.
And it comes back to the circumstance. I don't know why I would have said that if I'd have had those explicit admissions in the Wayne Peters letter, where there's no possibility of an appointment, full stop.
But it's the case, isn't it, that your job in this case was just to get rid of him. That was your role.
Yes.
Now, you say that for the reasons previously explained and taking into account all the circumstances, can you help us with what to reference to?
That would have been probably what's in the second part of the first Wayne Peters letter.
The list of the various points.
Yes.
That you accept, I think, that letter is accurate in that respect as to what was said at the first meeting.
Yes. That's what has me puzzled, because normally they're the things you talk about in order to get to a point of some admissions, and I can't understand why we talked about that if we'd already had these explicit admissions. That's what has me totally puzzled. I just can't explain.
Now, I think you said yesterday that this may well have been your first diocesan priest.
I'm not sure.
Well, you thought it might have been.
Yes.
And in fact, you'd been dealing with brothers, Maris or Christian brothers before.
Yes.
So when you're talking about what usually happened, that was in relation to brothers.
It was the same general principles.
Well, if this was probably your first one, how would you know?
No, I don't. The principles are the same. Whether the man's a brother or a priest, the issues are the same. The principles are the same.
But as it was, this was most likely your first diocesan priest.
I can't be sure of that.
Now, your letter to Bishop Manning refers to the discussion and the fact that Farrell wanted some time to reflect on the proposal and consider the practicalities. Now, I take it that's not unusual for there to be some period of time whereby the brother or priest wants to think about how to go forward.
And that would depend on the circumstances.
Not unusual. Now, there's no reference in this letter to any specific concern about the way in which he appeared in that first meeting, is there?
In terms of his demeanour or manner?
No. Now, I think also Father Peters gave an account to the bishop as well about this meeting.
Yes.
And that's at tab 171. Now, he provides further detail by reference to the various points of discussion.
Yes.
And you agree with, in a general sense, with what he set out as what happened at that meeting?
Yes.
And it's clear from what you now know that he wrote this letter, having written the previous letter of the 11th of September.
Yes.
And indeed that Bishop Manning read this letter, having read and received the previous letter of the 11th of September.
I don't know about the connection with the two letters.
We'll just assume, for the purposes of this question, that Bishop Manning received the letter of the 11th of September.
Yes.
So, on that assumption, this letter was received by Bishop Manning knowing the contents of the first letter.
Yes.
And having received your letter as to the second meeting.
Yes.
Now, there's various references to what it was that Father Farrell wanted and what it was that the three of you thought should happen going forward. At the bottom of the third page, paragraph 7, there's reference there to it was hard to ascertain just what emotions were going on in Father Farrell. He seemed to act in a calm and business-like manner throughout. That's your recollection as to how he was too, I take it.
Well, look, I specifically recall the second meeting and what his demeanour was like. I just don't have that in my mind also.
So do you have a better recall of the first meeting?
I remember I recall of the first meeting is that he came in. This was the first time we met with him, very angry and very upset and very defensive is my recollection of the demeanour.
Calmed down by the second meeting?
Well, no, he said he indicated he was very angry about it all.
If you accept Father Peters, he said he seemed to act in a calm and business-like manner.
I can't specifically recall.
Now, you know now, I take it, that Father Usher made notes after the first and second meeting.
Yes.
And you would have had regard for them, to them, having prepared for today and yesterday.
Yes.
Did you see them before then?
No.
Not at the time?
Not at the time, certainly not.
Just before I go to those, Ron, I noticed the time.
Yes, very well. We'll take the morning adjournment.
Yes, sir.